Hi, my name is Maria and this is my channel, Tea Books Magic, and today I'm here to do a wrap up of the books that I've read so far this year. It's been a while. I kind of disappeared from BookTube for a little bit. I went through a big life and reading slump. Unfortunately, over the last few months, I kind of had a lot of personal stuff going on and work stress got even more unbearable than usual, and it was really affecting me, and I deal with seasonal depression anyway, so it was not a good time. My depression was pretty high and I tend to draw into myself a bit with that, so I found it hard to continue with BookTube, and I was hit by a reading slump at the same time. The life stuff kind of happened in December leading into January, and then at the end of January I then also fell into a reading slump. And something that I kind of discovered about myself through all this is that most people, or I guess a lot of people, read as a way to relax and de-stress. And unfortunately for me, reading feels like a very active hobby. It's something that I love to do, obviously, but for me, when I kind of get really overworked or my brain feels really depressed or tired or anxious, I kind of can't concentrate on reading. It feels like too much brain power and I don't really have the capacity for that. I don't know if it's because I read fantasy and there's a lot of kind of world building and magic systems that you have to wrap your mind around, but for whatever reason, reading I stop being able to read when I'm depressed or in a really bad life slump, and so that usually does lead to a reading slump, and I find myself just binge watching a lot of TV or doing kind of mindless stuff that is the only kind of way for me to then decompress, and I just need to give myself time. I tried a few times in kind of February to push myself out of the reading slump, and it was kind of just the wrong thing. I just needed to let it run its course, and luckily, beginning of March, I'm now reading again. So I haven't done much reading this year. In general, my reading that I have done has been very kind of different than what I planned it to be. I read some YA, I DNF'd a few books. I haven't really kind of gone for the big fantasy, adult fantasy tomes and big series that I really wanted to, because I wasn't in the right mind frame for it at the time. So I've kind of just had to accept that a little bit. I scrapped a lot of my reading goals. I'm just trying to take it easy on myself a little bit, not put as much pressure on myself. I'm trying to read when I want to read and give myself times off when I don't. This probably is self-explanatory and you all do that much better than I do, but I am someone who kind of heaps pressure on myself. So for me, it's kind of something that I actively need to remind myself of, is just not overdo it and trying to put too much pressure on myself. So I'm trying to take it easier. I'm kind of scrapping, like I said, reading goals and just kind of going with where things take me. And luckily I do seem to have kind of gotten my reading love back. I'm finally reading some adult fantasy and loving it, and just in general feeling like my mental health is in a better place than it was. So I'm feeling a lot better. I felt like this was a good time to come back to BookTube, and I'm gonna also again just try not to overpressure myself here too much either. Again, it's all internal. None of it is anything that anyone is pressuring me to do, but I tend to put pressure on myself to film regularly or to read enough in order to have content, and so I'm just kind of realizing a little bit that I need to, like I said, just be a little easier on myself and try and focus on the enjoyment and passion of it, and luckily that seems to be working. So fingers crossed. Hopefully this is not quite a return to BookTube, but essentially, hopefully I'm over the worst mental health period I had, and hopefully things are a little better from here. Thank you for bearing with me if you are still here, and for tuning back into my content, as delayed as it is. I also wanted to say that if I wasn't keeping up with your channels or commenting on your videos as much as I usually was, it's because when I'm in a reading slump, I can't really watch BookTube either for whatever reason. I feel like books as a topic, unfortunately for me, seem to kind of remind my brain and just make it feel worse about not reading. So I kind of, like I said, I just binged a lot of TV. And yeah, so I just kind of wanted to give you a little explanation. I won't keep rambling because I don't want this video to be too long. I do still want to do a wrap up of books that I've read so far this year. I also wanted to ask, I know it's past the kind of time of the year when everyone was doing their favorites and least favorites of 2021 lists, and I don't know if it makes sense at this point to kind of film a video of my favorite books and least favorite books. Let me know if you would still want to see that. Part of me wants to do it because I love that end of year content and I feel bad that I missed out on it. I actually missed out on it my first year when I started BookTube too, so I feel like like I said, seasonal depression, I feel like that's the worst time of the year for me for whatever reason. So that's usually when my mental health goes a bit down anyway. But if you would be interested in seeing favorites, least favorites of 2021, let me know. I'm kind of still on the fence of whether or not it makes sense to film that at this point. But yeah, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're doing well mentally and that you're enjoying your reading and that you're not being too hard on yourself. With that said, let's dive into the books. I did also kind of feel a little weird skipping a big chunk of time. The last wrap up I did came kind of into, I think, middle of November, because I don't do monthly wrap-ups really, and so I missed going over books from the second half of November and December. Feels a bit weird to kind of just skip over that, especially since some of the books that I've read so far this year are sequels to those books, and I it'd be weird to say, hey, I read the sequel to a book that you haven't even heard that I read the first book of in the first place. So I'm gonna go over those super quickly, quick fire. I'm just gonna say what it is, like one sentence about how I felt about it and a rating. I'm not going in depth at all. If you want to know how I felt about it in more detail in the comments, let me know, and I'll be happy to kind of chat with you a bit more in there. But I just wanted to go over it a little bit in a quick fire way, and might even cut this section if it ends up being too long of a video, but I wanted to try it. So quick fire of books that I kind of finished toward the tail end of last year. We've got Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Live Ship Traders, and I gave this 3.5 stars. This was my least favorite in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, just because I wasn't fully satisfied with how some of the plot lines wrapped up, specifically like the Amber plot line. I thought that there was going to be more to it and just kind of wasn't given that full satisfactory reveal. And also this book is a lot darker than the other two. This is the one that kind of has all the trigger warnings that people warn you about with this series, and it felt like kind of dark that wasn't really optimistic dark. It left me just feeling a little bit hopeless at the end of it, and that's not usually the feeling I want from a book. Granted, I did read this in November, and like I said, my depression did hit in December, so potentially some of that was influenced, but from talking with Kristen, from Kristen is Fully Booked, who I buddy read this with, she also had a lot of similar feelings. So I think that that's also just a Hobb thing. But yeah, 3.5 stars, still an amazing trilogy overall. I gave the first two books 4 stars, you may remember, and wow, I'm really bad at this one sentence thing, aren't I? And I still really did enjoy this trilogy. It's just that the finale was a bit tough for me. I'm going to try to be a little bit faster. In the Labyrinth of Drakes, book 4 of the Lady Trent series by Marie Brennan. This book I gave 4 stars. I've been absolutely loving this series. I am participating in a Lady Trent read-along that is happening right now with Kristen from Kristen is Fully Booked and 3 other booktubers. I'll link the announcement video in the description below if you want to know more about that. We're actually only up to the 2nd book and they're pretty short, so it's still a great time to join us. And because we'll be doing a kind of live show with each book and going into more depth, I won't really say much more about this, but I do love this series and I'm rereading it and really enjoying it, the reread as well. I forgot to say that I'm also not really going over plots at all because I'm trying to keep this quickfire, even though we have discovered that I'm absolutely awful at that. Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I gave this 3 stars and it was just a very meh YA book. It just had a lot of tropes and kind of insta-love in a way that they explain a bit, but I still think could have been done better. It had a very cool world, but it just wasn't anything spectacular, and I didn't feel compelled to continue on with the trilogy. Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. This is the 3rd book in the Greenbone Saga trilogy. It hurts my heart a little bit to go rapid fire on this one because I love this series so much. I did give this 5 stars. Jade War is still my absolute favorite, but I loved every moment of this book. I'm sure I'll be raving more about this series on my channel, so you will hear me talk about this more, but the finale was wonderful. I cried. It was very emotionally heart-wrenching. Apparently that's something that we need to stress more about this series because Kristen recently read it and wasn't prepared for how emotionally stressful it is. It is a very emotionally stressful series, and it only gets more emotionally stressful with each book, so prepare yourself, but in the best way. Like, I feel so invested in this world and these characters, and this book gave me that same kind of book hangover that Jade War did, where it's all I could think about for the month after. I loved the politics, I loved how it wrapped up, I loved the generational storyline. We follow the Call siblings, and we also get to see some of their children in this 3rd book, which is something that some people might not love because this book does have a lot of time jumps, and they are pretty big time jumps, and there are many of them. I think someone said there were like 7 or more, so also something to know going in. I went into the 3rd book knowing there were time jumps and was prepared for it, so I didn't mind it, and I also liked, like I said, the kind of generational overview that gave us and seeing where things were taken, but I know that that's not something everyone would love, so I did want to highlight that. Everyone should read the Greenbow Saga. I absolutely love it. Book 1 for me was the least favorite and kind of a rocky start, but please keep pushing. It's an amazing series. It's so good and one of my all-time favorites now. The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This was given to me as a gift for Christmas by my mom, which is why I picked it up right away. I gave this 3.5 stars. I think I originally rated it a 4, but kind of thinking back, it's more like 3.5, 3.75. I enjoyed it overall, and we'll kind of talk a bit more about it in just a second when I talk about what I've read so far this year. And finally, the last book that I read in December of last year was Blaze Wrath Games by Amparo Ortiz. This is a book that I won in a Goodreads giveaway and one that I was really, really excited for. It's a YA series that's kind of a World Cup meets dragons. And unfortunately, this was one of my least favorite books of the year. I did give it 2 stars, and it ended the year on a bad note for me. I buddy read this with Mary Beth from Mary Beth Dwells in Books, who is basically like my bookish twin. We have pretty much the same opinions on everything, and both of us were, even from the beginning, just not 100% feeling it. I probably should have DNF'd it, but I pushed through because it was a buddy read, and because I didn't actively start having problems with it until the halfway point, but I really, really didn't like this book. It unfortunately just felt like a very young YA to me. There were a lot of villain monologues. The villain was very flat, Things in the plot just didn't make sense. There was girl on girl hate that didn't feel like there was a reason for it. The main character was really, really frustrating and just made, in my opinion, dumb decisions a lot and things that just didn't make sense for her to do. She felt very naive and just kind of very foolhardy, and it didn't really make sense why the villain was going after her in the first place. I don't know, there's just a lot of like plot holes, and the main characters frustrated me a lot. I feel really bad saying that because this does have Puerto Rican rep. The author is Puerto Rican, and there is good queer rep of with side characters as well, so there are good points. I think this is, like I said, a YA book that would appeal to younger readers, and I've just grown out of that. I'm more of an adult fantasy or higher YA reader now, so I think that was part of it, but I also do think that the plot needed more work. Okay, so now that I've utterly failed to be quick about those, let's go into the books that I've read so far this year. The book that I started out the year with was Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao, which I did give 4.5 stars. I loved this. This kind of redeemed YA fantasy for me. I was starting to think that maybe I should just stop picking them up altogether, but this one just reminded me of why I do love YA fantasy still. It's really fast read. I blew through it, I think, in 1 or 2 days. Highly addicting. It essentially follows this kind of Pacific Rim inspired world, is how I've heard a lot of people describe it, where the world is at war, and there are these kind of chrysalises or giant husks that pilots are learning to power up and take into battle. And the concept is that these are led by male pilots who need female pilots or concubines. Essentially, they're not really on equal levels, to be there to lend them their kind of life power, and in most cases this leads to the death of the female concubines because they exhaust them of their life force. In very rare cases, the female concubine will actually bond with the male pilot and then they will have a longer extended life, but in most cases this is a death sentence for any girl who is chosen. We follow Zetienne, whose sister was killed by one of these pilots, and Zetienne sets out to be chosen and essentially wants to get revenge, and the story goes from there. Zetienne is a great character to follow. She is just fierce and full of rage, and someone that I think in a lot of cases would potentially be annoying because her revenge and her anger are so strong that she'll do whatever it takes, and she doesn't really consider the consequences of her actions to others. But at the same time, the author writes her so well, and she is so understandable, and even though she was morally gray, I was rooting the entire time for her because this world is so messed up, and so how could she not be full of rage? It makes complete sense. Zetienne is a fireball of a girl. This is such a feministic book. Zetienne is like the definition of girl power, and I just would, like I said, I was rooting for her the entire time. There is a polyamorous relationship in this that was really great to read about and that I do really like and I'm very invested in. I think that it could have done with more development, but I was okay also with the development that it did get. I really enjoyed how this take on gender inequality and the rage that this character brought to these issues, and I'm so looking forward to the next installment. It ended on a cliffhanger that just had me itching for the next book, so I can't wait to pick that up. The next book that I read in January was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 of the Farseer trilogy, and I did buddy read this with Kristen, as mentioned previously. In the series, we follow Fitz, who is discovered to be the bastard son of a prince in this kingdom, and that causes this giant scandal and upheaval of the monarchy. Fitz's father essentially leaves in shame and gives up his right to the throne, which upsets the succession a bit, and then Fitz, because he's kind of a threat to the royal family being a bastard son, is brought to the castle for in order to be watched over. They aren't sure what to do with him because they can't give him too much power, or again, he'll be a threat, but they also need to keep an eye on him, so he is trained to be an assassin for the monarchy, essentially. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. I do love Robin Hobb's writing in general. It's very comforting. It always feels like I'm kind of coming home to something familiar, and it's like a warm hug despite how dark her world is and her themes are. So yeah, I love her writing, but at the same time, something about her writing doesn't fully click with me either. So I've given most of her books 4 stars. I've read The Live Ship Traders, and then now I've read this one. I've given most of them 4 stars and generally had a great time with them, but I've yet to reach kind of like full love Robin Hobb obsession that a lot of people have, which just surprises me because Robin Hobb is first and foremost described as a character-driven writer, and I am a character-driven reader by far. So I expected that this would be an author and just a series that would immediately click with me, that would become an absolute favorite, and I have yet to kind of reach that point, and based on this, I'm not sure if I ever will. I think I'm going to continue enjoying all her books, but she writes with almost a detached perspective to me, where I feel like I'm watching the events that are happening to these characters almost from a distance or from above, and I care about what's happening to them, but I don't feel like I'm feeling it with them. I'm not there with them necessarily, so I'm not as invested as I could be, and there's just something about it that it kind of, like I said, there feels like a distance and I can't fully connect. I do think that I have more potential of connecting with Fitz than any of her other characters, partly because it is mainly his story in these series, whereas Live Ship Traders was more like multi-POV, and we took a little less time with each character because of that. So I could see myself falling in love with Fitz and potentially reaching that point, but I'm just, maybe it's something about her writing and maybe I never will. But I'm excited to keep continuing on. Like I said, I do overall enjoy them. I don't know if this will ever be an absolute favorite for me. I'm not going as in-depth with these as I usually would because I am trying to keep this video short, but one other thing I should mention is that that Robin Hobb's writing in general, and especially in this book, is very slow-paced, so we kind of really follow Fitz's childhood, and there's a lot of like, it's almost like slice of life moments with him. I really enjoy that, again, as a character-driven reader. I didn't have any issues with the pacing, but even her most fast-paced books, aka Live Ship Traders, were still slow reads, so I did want to mention that. She is a slower-paced kind of writer and takes time to really live with characters. And then I was fully in the midst of my slump, so I tried to pick up a novella. I thought that would maybe get me back into reading, and I picked up A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. This is my first and so far only 5-star book of the year. I absolutely loved this. This novella introduced me to my new dream career path, which is a tea monk. Basically, the main character, who is a tea monk, has this wagon that he drives around the country, and he stops at different villages, sets up his tables, takes out his tea leaves and brewing supplies, and people from the village will come up and will tell him kind of their struggles, their problems, their difficulties that they're facing, and he will hear them out, and then he'll make a cup of tea for them with whatever they need, whether it's something invigorating to help a parent stay up with a newborn child or something calming for someone who's going through a lot of anxiety, and then he will give them that tea and send them on their way. And can you think of a better career? Getting to kind of be like a counselor mixed with giving people tea and just getting to help people and then prepare tea for them. I wish this career existed, and I want to kind of pioneer a career path because that sounds amazing. So first of all, that concept I loved. And that's not even touching on kind of the main plot of this story, which is that in this kind of futuristic society, at some point, the robots that had been built to do a lot of people's work for them all of a sudden gained self-awareness and essentially up and left. And so people were left to manage without technology, but also there's a portion of this world that was left kind of wilderness to the robots. There was a treaty that agreed that they wouldn't bother them and the robots wouldn't bother the society. So everyone's kind of sectioned into people versus wilderness where robots are. And our tea monk is going through a crisis of self and ends up on a path where they encounter one of these robots and are having kind of one of the first interactions with them since this kind of self-awareness of the robots and them leaving happened. What I'll say about this story is that if you, like me during my life slump, were feeling purposeless, or if you just in general have always kind of had questions about kind of trying to find a deeper meaning to life, you need to read this book. This book just has the most beautiful message about that and really just gave me this sense of peace. Like, I cried at this little novella. It really I feel like it told me what I needed to be told in that moment and in my life in general, and I will treasure it so much for that reason. It has just the most beautiful message about purpose, and just the emotional impact this novella had on me cannot be explained enough. I absolutely loved it. It's charming and precious, but also at the same time so profound. Highly recommend. And I wasn't ever really that interested in picking up other Becky Chambers works, but this definitely has me interested. I also picked up and DNF'd The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart, which is book 2 and the sequel to The Bone Shard Daughter. Like I said earlier, I did enjoy Bone Shard Daughter. I gave it 3.5 stars. I didn't fully connect with any of the characters, so that's why it wasn't higher, but I did enjoy the story overall, and the plot is one of those where it really has you guessing. I had so many different theories that I was writing down and so many things that I was kind of theorizing and trying to pick out, and it just was a lot of fun to follow along with the plot, and the world is really interesting. This follows a world where the Emperor rules through bone shard magic, and it's a multi-POV story. So we follow the Emperor's daughter, Lynn, who can't remember anything further back than 3 years. She's trying to figure out the mystery of what happened to her memory, and also needs to prove to her father that she is capable of taking over as his heir, and in order for him to trust her with kind of the secrets of bone shard magic, she needs to prove to him that she is capable of taking over as his heir. I really needs to figure out the mystery of why she didn't have those memories. Otherwise, her father may pass on the bone shard magic to his kind of adopted mentee instead. Bone shard magic is essentially magic that's fairly gory. Essentially, every citizen gives up a bone shard or a segment of their bone, and then the Emperor uses that to animate these kind of constructs that can do different tasks, whether that's guarding the empire or just meaning, like different work and things like that. They're a big part of the society, and they're also said to be one of the things that is keeping this previous civilization threat from coming back that was previously almost responsible for the extinction of our people. Like I said, it's multi-POV. We do follow other POVs, including Jovis, who is a smuggler and who is trying to find his wife and kind of is someone who keeps being pulled into doing good things and helping other people out when really all he's trying to do is track down information about where his wife disappeared to. And then we also follow Falu and Renami, who are our Sapphic rep couple. Falu is a governor's daughter, and Renami is trying to convince her to kind of participate and help out with a rebellion against her father governor's rule. I was interested in where the plot was going with book one, but not super invested in any of the characters, and I think that's a big reason of why I DNF'd book two. I wasn't particularly invested in any character, and there's a relationship that starts to develop in book two that I just think has very icky and kind of messed up setup of how it started. That was really bothering me, and I could have been sold on it, but the author didn't do a good job of the development, I felt like, so I was really not liking where that was going. And then there wasn't anything really gripping me. There had been an animal companion in book one that I did really enjoy, but in book two, I felt like the animal companion, it kind of evolves more and more as the book goes on. It kind of starts learning language and becoming smarter and things like that, but it evolved so much in book two that it really just felt like a person, like a human. Even though it's supposed to be this like cute animal companion that's really adorable, it just felt like our character who had bonded with this animal companion, it felt like the animal companion was just a human, just another person. That lost its charm. I wasn't invested in any of the characters, and the romance felt really icky, and I could have pushed through, but I knew it wasn't going to be a highly rated book for me, so I just put it down. And yeah, I have heard other people say that in general this is kind of more of a plot-driven series, not very character-driven, and I agree with that. I think that that's a big reason for why it just didn't click with me and why I'm not continuing on. During my slump in February, I did try to get myself out of my slump. I'd kind of tried picking up adult fantasy here and there and put them all down, so instead I wanted to pick up something faster, kind of a more YA romance-based read. So I picked up Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, I think it is. I'm giving this 3 stars. It's essentially following kind of an enemies to lovers arranged marriage situation where our main character, one of them is a witch, and she ends up having to be in a marriage of convenience with a witch hunter. And so there's that kind of secret between them that she's keeping from him. This was kind of exactly what I needed it to be at that moment. I don't think I would have enjoyed it or rated it 3 stars in any other circumstance, but that's my dog if he's grumbling in the back. I don't think I would have really rated it this high in any other circumstance because there wasn't much to it. It was kind of a fluff book for me, but it was a quick, easy read. I was interested in where the romance would go. I really don't have much more to say about this. It was very meh, very forgettable, but just kind of what I needed in that moment. It's not a series I felt very compelled to continue on with, but I did skim books 2 and 3 just to see kind of where the romance went. I'm not counting them as read because I didn't really read them, and I wouldn't really recommend it, but like I said, it was just right place, right time, and it did kind of help me get out of the slump a little by giving me something easy to get through and not necessarily as mind-taxing as something like adult fantasy would have been. Okay, and then the last book that I'm going to talk about in this video is A Natural History of Dragons. You probably already saw me talk about this in my previous reading wrap-up where I read it for the first time. This was a reread for me. I originally gave it 4.5 stars and I decided not to re-rate it really this time. I'm just keeping the rating as is. This is by Marie Brennan and it is the first book of the Lady Trent series. Like I said, I am doing a read-along of the Lady Trent series with 4 other booktubers, and we would love to have you join us. My previous announcement with all the info is in the description below, and our next live show for book 2, which is the Tropic of Serpents, is set for April 6th, I believe, Wednesday, April 6th, at 6 p.m. Pacific time. This series follows Isabella Trent, who from a very early age has this just deep passion for dragons and first wants to study dragons, and kind of it follows her journey to becoming a renowned dragon natural historian, and also kind of her path of defeating obstacles in her way due to her being a woman. It's kind of set in what is described as a Victorian era-esque time, but as you may have seen in our live show of the first book's discussion, there were some contested opinions on that. I'll link the live show, by the way, down below as well if you want to go back and watch and hear our full thoughts on this, both spoiler and non-spoiler. I personally really love this series. I think that Isabel Trent leaps off the pages and just is a very her passion and kind of her fiery personality are just very they feel very real to me. She also has, again, my kind of dream career path. I've always loved dragons, and I always, as a kid, wished that I could study dragons, so this is kind of like the embodiment of that in a book. I love seeing the different cultures and countries that she travels to in her studies and her different scientific process. There's not a huge amount of dragons. Don't expect kind of dragons that bond with anyone or anything like that. It's more of a research-based scientific study of them, but I love the unique twist on that. And I especially enjoy the relationships in book 1, so this is one of my favorite installments in the series. I highly recommend this. Please join us as we are continuing on with the read-along. They're not very long, and you have plenty of time to catch up. We're only on book 2, and you have until April 6th to catch up with us on that. Whew, okay, so my phone has luckily not given out on me, and I have made it through all the books that I wanted to wrap up so far. These probably aren't the books you were expecting to see me read, considering the recent video I made talking about books that were on my radar, and they're really kind of not the books that I expected to be reading, considering a lot of my goals were like read less YA, read more adult fantasy, and focus on series that I really want to start and things like that. But I've kind of come to accept that I had to just throw my reading goals out the window and kind of go where things were taking me with reading. So a bit more YA than I expected, but we did have a book, like I said, Iron Widow, that redeemed my belief in YA fantasy, so that was exciting, and we had my first 5-star read of the year. Hopefully this is the setup for more good reading to come. I've rambled an absolute ton in this video, even though I tried to keep it brief, so I'm gonna go now, but thank you again for bearing with me while I've been gone, and thank you so much for watching my videos, and if you made it through this whole thing, thank you so much for that too. Let me know what you've been reading, what you've been loving, and how your year started off, hopefully a little bit smoother and better than mine. Have you had your first 5-star read of the year yet? I'd love to hear about that if you have. Please chat with me in the comments down below. I hope you are all doing great and enjoying your reading, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.